Tensions over Israel's bombardment of Gaza are boiling over into the other Palestinian territories, the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, as well as in Israeli towns with mixed populations. In many places, Palestinian demonstrators have clashed with Israeli police. It's the largest show of Palestinian anger since the onset of hostilities between Israel and Gaza militants last week. While the frustration comes amid growing international appeals for an end to the fighting, which have so far gone unheeded.
The streets of Hebron, full of Palestinian protesters, part of a day of anger that saw strikes and demonstrations in Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank. A show of Palestinian unity, shared outrage over the death toll in Gaza and Israeli policy toward the occupied territories. We must all go out into the streets and fight in solidarity with our people dying in Gaza. Here we have settlements and checkpoints and an occupation, and all Palestinians must play a role. The death toll rose again on both sides on Tuesday. On the Israeli side, rockets from Gaza struck a house used by guest workers in the Israeli town of Eshdod, killing 2 Thai nationals. The sound of explosions is constant in Israeli areas within the rocket's range. The Iron Dome anti-missile system stops most, but not all. We've lived in this situation all our lives. We could say that we're used to it, but it's not logical that a terrorist group is dictating how we live. For a few hours you can rest, then after that Hamas launches rockets. It can't continue like this. Israeli airstrikes on Gaza continued, fueling a humanitarian crisis. Most of the dead here are civilians, and now thousands of Gazans are cut off from clean water and have no access to medicines. Hospitals already struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic are stretched to their limits. Israel says it is targeting leaders of the militant Hamas movement that governs Gaza, and a system of tunnels Israel says are used to move weapons. As global calls mount for an end to the bloodshed, the White House says President Biden told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he supported a ceasefire but stopped short of calling for one. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has said Israel will not stop airstrikes until Hamas pays a price Gazans are already paying.
Let's get more from Matthias Schmaler. He's director of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in Gaza. Welcome to DW. The Gaza Strip is a densely populated area, so when tens of thousands get displaced, as we've just seen in that report, where do they get displaced to?
Good afternoon to you. Well, we, as of this morning, have 48,000 people in 58 of our United Nations UNRWA schools here. Clearly, the population, not least based on the experiences in 2014, still see UN installations painted in blue and with a blue UN flag on top of it as relatively more safe and secure than their own homes. So that's basically one place they can go to. And then we also know that many have gone to friends and relatives in areas they perceive as less of a target, and that's away from border areas and so on. So there's also significant numbers with friends and relatives, and we should not overlook them either.
Right. And are those UN buildings respected in the shelling?
Look, we have assurances from both sides that UN installations are not targets, and the Israelis know the coordinates of all our installations, and we've shared them with them, including recently. Unfortunately, this time round, some of the strikes are just too close to our installation. So this morning, we had a massive explosion right next to our office compound here and not far away from one of the schools that is housing refugees. And we know that the solar panels, for example, were not destroyed completely, but damaged. So we are seeing a lot of destruction of civilian infrastructure, as I would call it, because the strikes are too close to these infrastructures.
When you say they're too close, are you talking about damage being sustained to these UN buildings and schools?
Well, on my own compound here, again, the office compound, if I could take you around it, you would see there is considerable damage to the buildings. And, you know, that's one aspect is the damage itself. I also would like to mention not just UNRWA installations. We know that 2 primary healthcare centers run by the authorities have been destroyed. We know an MSF clinic has been destroyed. We know that the central lab for COVID-19 testing is no longer functional as a result of strikes. And we know that the central ambulance unit of the Palestine Red Crescent has been badly affected. So it has a serious impact on our collective ability to provide humanitarian service.
And where are these rockets coming from? These buildings are being destroyed by whose rockets?
It's the Israeli retaliation strikes. You know, now I'm very well aware that, and for me it's of course unacceptable as a UN person, the number of rockets, any rocket flying from here to Israel. We know that some of them have fallen short, but all the information I have, and I believe it's credible and reliable, and I've seen some of it with my own eyes, is that by far most of the damage is being caused by the severe Israeli retaliatory strikes.
Right. Matthias Schmaler, thank you for joining us. Matthias Schmaler from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in Gaza.
Thank you.
And I can talk now to journalist Hazem Balusha in Gaza City. Hazem, Palestinians in Israel and the West Bank are on strike, rallying against Israel's military operations in Gaza. Can you bring us up to speed in terms of what the situation is like where you are right now?
Well, I'm in Gaza City, and I can hear the Israeli strikes. In the same time, at some point they were launching of rockets from Gaza into Israeli towns. Mainly today they were firing of mortars at the border, as the military wings of Hamas and Islamic Jihad announced. In the same time, the Israeli war jets hit many places. In the morning there was a target of a building that contains some bookstores, agriculture places where the Israelis are saying that this is where Hamas tunnels is, and many other streets were targeted during the last night.
Now, Hazem, the United Nations says that 48,000 people, according to the United Nations, have fled their homes in Gaza. What can you tell us about their situation? Do they have a safe place to go, somewhere to shelter?
Well, since like 4 days ago, when Israeli shelling at the border area, some of the residents of Beit Lahia in North Gaza Strip and Bedouin village in the north as well, they fled their houses and they went to the UNRWA schools. About 53 schools were become open and as shelters. UNRWA is preparing these places, but in the same time, still, this is not a proper shelters. It's just schools. There are some food provided to those schools. To the people are taking them as a shelter. The fear from the Ministry of Health. These places are a good place for viruses, including the coronavirus, the spread of coronavirus, as it's not well prepared for such a huge number of people.
Right, and of course no social distancing, and we understand also the only COVID-19 lab in Gaza also fell victim to the airstrikes. What can you tell us about the situation in the hospitals in Gaza? How are they coping with the influx of injured?
Well, the health system in Gaza is already in a weak position. They experienced 15 years of blockade, according to the spokesperson of the Ministry of Health that I talked to earlier. He was complaining that many clinics belonging to the Ministry of Health were damaged. One of them was yesterday when a building near the main clinic in Gaza City was hit, and there was some damage. the main hospital is run of equipment and medicine, as like there is a huge drain of that due to the big number of injuries. They are talking about more than 1,400 injuries during the 9 days. So in general, and they were exhausted by as well the year of COVID-19 outbreak in Gaza Strip.
Hazem Balusha, in Gaza City, reporting. Thank you very much. Thank you. And meanwhile, EU foreign ministers just wrapped up talks on the latest deadly violence. Let's get you the latest from our Brussels bureau chief, Alexandra van Namen. Alexandra, first off, what has been decided?
Well, actually nothing, we have to say. After the video conference concluded, EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell held a press conference, and he talked to us reporters, urging that it's the most important thing right now is to end the violence and to implement a ceasefire immediately. He also said that Israel has the right to defend itself, but that it's also important to respect the international law and to protect civilians. And he condemned rocket attacks by Hamas. But important point here is to say that only 26 of 27 EU member states backed this statement. Hungary was against it. And of course, when we know that the nature of EU foreign policy making is to speak with one voice, we don't have any decision here and we don't have a common position on Israel-Gaza crisis right now.
Just another vaguely worded statement. How has the EU navigated the crisis so far, Alexandra? And what is influencing the EU's response to this crisis?
Well, not very well, I would say. So they were not very quick to respond. And now, as I just said, they don't have a common position on the crisis right now. And that is, of course, because they have different interests. Some of the EU member states they have very close ties with the Israeli government. States like Hungary, for example, they support the Israeli government and try to soften any possible criticism of the Israeli government. Other states in the northern part of the European Union, like Sweden or Ireland, for example, they are very critical of Israel. So it's very difficult to bring all these positions together. And this is sort of embarrassing for the European Union. Ahead of the video conference today, the German foreign minister, Maas, said that it's important for the European Union to play a bigger role in the process. But as it seems, it's not quite possible right now.
A mixed bag. DW Brussels bureau chief Alexandra van Namen reporting from Brussels, as always. Thank you.